Well, hello and welcome to the 62nd episode of the Adoption and Fostering Podcast with me, Al Coates, and...
me, Scott Casson Orane.
Official Well, we're actually sat here together, aren't we, for an unusual change?
We are, yeah. We've been together actually for 3 days.
Yeah. Only in a platonic kind of...
Yeah, well, of course.
Yeah. And I have to comment that you are sat there in your pyjamas.
I am. And I'm not making any apologies for it.
Yeah, very odd experience, because I'm fully clothed.
Yes, thankfully.
Yeah, we are like Eric and Ernie of the adoption podcast world.
Aren't we?
Increasingly. So it's been your wedding, but then we're putting this intro on an interview we did weeks and weeks ago now.
Yeah.
Can't remember. I'm struggling to even remember.
I can't remember what day it is today.
It's true, but congratulations on getting married, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes.
It was a great day.
It was a fantastic... Maybe we should, at the end, maybe we could do a whole, podcast extras session, so those who are interested can opt in. Those who care. Which will be...
2.
Yeah.
My mum.
Of course.
Maybe. And my mother-in-law, maybe.
Maybe, yeah, just to make sure we didn't say anything untoward about them. But we could maybe, and then people could opt in or opt out.
Exactly.
So you arranged this interview with Satwinder Sandhu.
Yeah. Well, I've always been quite interested in international adoption, having been brought up with... I wasn't brought up with them, but I was aware of my dad had some friends who'd adopted from China.
Right.
When I was little. And I was always fascinated by it. Not because it was adoption, but just because... wow, how does that work? How does that work for them? How does it work for their future and, their identity and all that sort of stuff? So I've always been interested in it, and I was aware of IAC through some of the work I've done with the CVA. And again...
The IAC is the International Adoption Centre.
I kept on getting it wrong when he was saying it, but I think that's...
We'll go with that.
Yeah. And
the CVA is the
consortium.
Right, okay.
Yeah, because we get told off for using acronyms, don't we?
Yeah.
Apologies. And really quite fascinated by that whole thing. And Satwinder has recently taken over from... well, he explains it in the interview, doesn't he? But he's recently taken over as CEO of IAC. And I think there's big things ahead for them. So I thought it was worthy to get him in quick. Find out some of his plans, some of the past, some of the,
we were there at the beginning.
We got the scoop.
The skinny.
Yeah. So yeah.
I have to say, this of all the interviews we've ever done, this is the one I was the most worried about.
And I can't believe that. I honestly, when we spoke beforehand, and you said, I'm really concerned about this one. And I thought it was just going to be, and it was.
It was yeah.
Well, and mustn't give anything away.
No.
But yeah, it was really interesting to listen to some of the kind of things. So. Yeah.
So shall we put it on? With no more ado, we shall crack on. Now. So we're joined by Satwinder Sandhu, who is the new Chief Executive Officer of International Adoption Centre. Good evening, Satwinder.
Good evening, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. It's really great that we've eventually managed to get you on, because I know I've been trying for a few months, but I think because you just taken over your new role, you wanted to settle in a bit before you spoke to us, which actually makes so much sense. But we're very in the moment. We like to do it like now. So, but thank you for
great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And we really wanted to kind of get to know you and get to know what you do, and also a bit more about IAC as well, because IAC has not really been out there in terms of social media and what have you until very recently. So would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a bit more about what you're doing?
So IAC is the Intercountry Adoption Centre, and since 2017 has been known as IAC, the Centre for Adoption. So the charity was set up 22 years ago by Jill Howarth, who has just retired as CEO. So she was the founder and the kind of the spirit of IAC, really. And in a nutshell, the service went from being an advice line that was partly funded by government to being an adoption support agency, helping local authorities and other agencies run inter-country adoption services. And then in 2010 became a fully fledged adoption agency in its own right, delivering all aspects of adoption. And in 2013, through DFE funding, also opened a UK domestic adoption team.
Oh.
And so now we offer the full kind of range of adoption services as you would know them in any adoption agency or local authority team.
Wow.
The focus is still inter-country adoption, because the reality is that whilst local authorities have a duty to deliver inter-country adoption services, it's such a small area, always has been, quite niche, quite specialist within the specialism of adoption. And through SLA arrangements and subscriptions, most local authorities in the country have commissioned IAC to run that work on their behalf. So we can either offer just a front-end inquiry and duty service, or we can do everything from start to finish. And at the moment, I think IAC in England is overseeing about 85% of all inter-country adoptions that are happening. Wow. And even though numbers have dropped dramatically over the last 20 years, we're still placing over 40 children a year, and at the moment we have 128 families who are approved as suitable to adopt and are waiting. So it's busy.
Yeah, I've got so many questions. Your opening thing there. Well, the first thing is just to recognise Jill's work, because I know that you are now taking over as CEO.
Yeah.
But to have started something like that 22 years ago, and to have retired now, I mean, what a massive impact that 22 years has had.
Massive. I mean, over that time that we know of, the agency has worked with 250 children directly. And so the impact of that, of course, is huge. And Jill was always the lone voice. And it links back to what you were saying, Scott, about IAC not really being on the radar, because inter-country adoption wasn't on the radar, because it was never really spoken about in the same way that we talk about adoption per se in this country.
Why do you think that is?
So Jill...
Sorry.
I think there's probably multiple reasons. I mean, one of them is, of course, we have a care system with over 5,500 children at any one time waiting for adoption in this country. So that has to be our priority. Of course it does. But there are lots of people in the country who, for different reasons, whether they're connected to the country they want to adopt from in some way, shape or form, or they came from the country they want to adopt from, have chosen to go overseas to adopt. And as we know, if you look at any children's charity internationally, and especially ones that are centred around poverty or loss and deprivation, those children in those images are the same children that need adoption. So the world is full of children who are vulnerable and have been traumatised or abused or abandoned. So I guess IAC really just takes on a global perspective on the issue that we all care so passionately about, which is adoption.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, because it's come up again and again, actually, and especially with my work through Adoption UK, because when we use the words Adoption UK, it's because that's the organisation name. It doesn't necessarily mean that we only, support adoption in the UK. In my head, and this is my personal opinion, actually, anybody who's adopted a child is on the same kind of level as me and and as Al. That's maybe not Al's opinion, but that's my opinion. Where our children have had an experience that they don't live with their birth family, and that's it. That's the end of that. So I think that's a really interesting. Go on, Al. I can see you're sitting on your hands there and you're rocking back and forward because you want to say things.
No, I'm going to let you talk, because I am. I'm going to let you kind of say what you've got to say, and then I've got my little list of questions.
I think what we're seeing here is the reality of how people feel about inter-country adoption. There are lots of strong views. They're often polarised views. And I guess in my career, I've been really fortunate to have worked in local authorities and voluntary adoption agencies, where I've, again, a bit like IAC, I've done the whole gamut, including fostering. And I've always felt passionate that any child that needs a family should have the opportunity to have one. And over my career, I've worked with hundreds of children in the UK who've needed adoption and have successfully been placed and hopefully are thriving. And I guess from a kind of ethical, moral point of view, I personally don't have an issue if people choose to go overseas. But I can completely understand the dilemmas that creates. And now more than ever, when we're looking so, internally in England and, becoming more and more insular as a country potentially, those same sorts of debates and issues are being polarised much more than ever. But for me, inter-country adoption isn't an immigration issue, it's an issue around children's needs. And that's often where, when I've debated this, things get lost because people are saying, well, why do people want to go overseas? There are lots of children here that need adoption, but personally, I feel the same way about surrogacy. Why do we want to create new babies when the world is full of living children who don't have families? So, and I guess that's just, how the different ways in which we all see the world.
And of course, we're all entitled to our own kind of belief and opinion on this sort of thing as well, aren't we? I feel the same way about surrogacy personally. So, I kind of do that little recoil thing when I hear people talk about surrogacy, but that's just because, that's my thoughts on it. That's my thing. I'll go on.
No, I am. I'm just being quiet in the corner.
You're all right. Are you all right?
I am absolutely fine. Right? I'm waiting for my moment to ask questions politely and respectfully.
I guess, the other thing, just to add perhaps in relation to Jill and her kind of legacy around this, Jill was of the view that inter-country adoption was needing to be seen and to be delivering a standard that was equitable to domestic adoption. And so one of the things she did religiously and repeatedly in the early days of IAC was make it really clear that inter-country adoption wasn't adoption through the back door, because there was this myth that people who had either been turned down as suitable for the UK were somehow finding some back passage to India or one of the African countries, and that, I can't hand on heart say that never happened.
No.
But there's lots of things in adoption in this country that we wouldn't repeat. And but certainly what Jill's mission was to put inter-country adoption on an equal footing. She's been really fortunate to have had an amazing working relationship with the DFE. And whilst they've got a tiny team up in Darlington, they are all as passionate about this work as we are. And between the department and the agency and other champions across the country in the sector, what they've achieved is the same standards. So the process is the same, the standards are the same, the criteria around being suitable or not are the same. It's just, at the end of it, people are being placed, children from different countries are being placed with them rather than a child from England.
Okay. Well, that was a lovely segue. Thank you so much, because that's brought me into my first question, which was, because people do have that perception around exactly what you've just said, that it's a back door into adoption. So can you maybe just explain a little bit more about the process to being able to adopt from abroad?
Well, there's the process in terms of being assessed as suitable is identical to the process we would recognise if somebody was adopting in this country. So once people have thought about their reasons and motivation to adopt, and they've picked up the phone to call their local authority or an adoption agency, most of the time they'll get redirected to us if they haven't found us as their first port of call. And so they'll speak to a duty social worker, have the initial conversations, and then be invited in for an information session. Sometimes we run information sessions that are specific to a country. And for example, at the moment, we have about 40 families adopting from India. So we run sessions that are specifically around India because they can be more detailed rather than generic. Sometimes people have really clear reasons and have thought through what country they want to adopt from. Other times they've not. Unfortunately, the reality is a lot of people end up at IAC because they are still being told by adoption teams that there won't be a suitable match for them in this country.
Okay.
Which, is highly problematic and controversial. And when I've raised this issue before, people have categorically denied it. But usually I've been speaking to senior managers, not frontline practitioners. This is a practice issue.
Is there an issue around age as well? Is that matches? When you say match, do you mean around people who want a baby?
Sometimes. I mean, I think that's changed dramatically. I think when Jill started the advice line, it probably predominantly was white couples who wanted to go abroad because they would probably be matched with a baby or a very young child.
Yeah.
That has changed because the world has changed. So countries like China and India, who were at the forefront of those sorts of children being placed for adoption internationally, want to be seen as leading forces in the world, not as countries who can't care for their own babies, who are orphans. So the criteria to adopt from those countries has changed dramatically. And now in India, it's unlikely that you'll be matched with a baby. It's likely to be a child who has had their first birthday or older.
Right.
And the process, therefore, really is for us to help people think through what those implications might be. And sometimes through those discussions and explorations before they've even started an assessment, people understand actually there may be a strong chance of them finding a child in this country that meets the kind of criteria they've been thinking about. Yeah. So the fact that we now have a domestic team means that we've got some advantage. We don't have to send people away to go elsewhere. We can sometimes process those applications ourselves. And
because I saw one of the statistics that you gave, which was in relation to the kind of the cohort of people who come to you. I'm just looking at what you sent us a little bit of information. So that you were talking like over 50% of those families those individuals are not white. They're black, minority ethnic backgrounds.
They are, and they are the people that are being told there isn't a match for them in this country. So whilst the advent of openness and race and culture and ethnicity not being a big consideration, my view very strongly is that only works one way: if you are a white adopter. If you're a white adopter, chances are you can be matched with any child in the care system, all things being equal. If you are a BME adopter from any BME community, you're very, very unlikely to be matched with a child of white heritage, even though that child might be 5 and waiting and be a really good match for you based on what you feel you can offer. So again, a practice element in this country that's very strongly embedded is that it's better for a white child to stay in limbo, and I don't want to belittle foster care or permanent foster care because there's a really strong place for that. But if a child is on an adoption plan and there are families out there, we've got 128 of them who might be a possible match, but they are black and the child is white, then there seems to be an issue with that placement going ahead.
So that door only swings one way, doesn't it? Realistically.
Yeah. So that's why it's sometimes much easier for a couple who are from Ghana to come to IAC and to have a child placed from Ghana, because not only will the child look like them and be likely to be from a similar part of the community as them, but they don't have to go through all of this pain of being told they're not suitable for 5, 6, 7 potential children in this country. And that is a driver for people to go overseas. And that's why over 50% now of our families are black. And on top of that, we've got about another 20% of all of our applications who are kinship adopters. So these are people who, for a variety of reasons, usually quite sad or difficult, complicated reasons, are wanting to adopt a child that's within their family or their network overseas. So we had a case recently where the child's mother had passed away. The father's never been on picture. The elderly grandmother is caring for this child in India, but the aunt and uncle have just been approved as suitable to adopt. So hopefully at some point this little boy will be able to join his aunt and uncle, who in essence now will be his new parents. And that often is, sometimes it's because that's the right plan for the child, sometimes that is an immigration issue, because in this country, the only way to enable that sort of child to come and live with their extended family is through an adoption order. And that's the same in other countries too.
So already you've blown my mind, because I'd not even... That's... Shut up. No, in some ways, that's the side that we never hear. I've never heard that, ever. And do you find that... I mean, I got a couple of questions. One is, how much does it cost? Because I thought, on a really basic level, if I go to my local authority for an English child, there's no cost. It's free. And so if someone comes to you, are they having to actually just find that assessment fee?
They are, and people are taking out loans, they're begging and borrowing from friends and family because there is no central government funding for inter-country adoption. And so people ask this all the time. My neighbour's adopted, in our local authority. The child came from the local authority, it didn't cost them a penny. Why am I having to pay close to £10,000 for the privilege? But of course, what they're paying for is the ability for IAC to run the service that has to determine whether they're suitable or not. They're not paying for a stamp on a dossier that will enable them to bring a child into the country. And it's a confusing message for people because, how do we communicate that effectively? And that's one of the challenges I've come across in my first few weeks as CEO. It's about communication and being clear that we're not charging fees to enable babies to be brought into this country. We're charging a service charge because we have to deliver the service on behalf of local authorities to enable us to assess whether these people are going to be suitable or not. And that's where the whole standard issue comes in again, because the standards are identical. So if we have concerns, issues, if something comes up on a DBS check or an overseas check, the process in terms of exploring that and deeming whether the risk is too great to risk somebody being approved as suitable is identical. So
do you have panels,
we have
PARs,
to be sure.
all of that kind of stuff? Do you take people?
It's identical. You would recognise the process as identical. So the reports obviously look a little bit different because there has to be extra information. Under the regulations, people have to be approved for a specific country. So there's got to be evidence as to why this country. You can't just pick a country at random and think that that's where you can go.
So you don't get a generic assessment, like a generic approval. But I suppose
to a degree you do.
Right.
But the connection to the country has to be evidenced as well. And so if you are a white couple and you want to go and adopt a baby from South Africa who is likely to be black, you have to obviously evidence how you're going to meet that child's needs and how you will ensure that your understanding of South Africa and the culture that child might come from is of a level that can demonstrate you've got potential to really honour that child's identity as the years could roll by in the future. And of course, that's difficult because all adopters I've worked with have said the reality of what you're taking on doesn't hit you until the child is in your home. So much of this is hypothetical. But we're not trying to put up barriers, but people have to evidence why. So where there isn't a connection with the country, that's often a bit more complicated because people do then have to understand that there will be questions and evidence required by panel to feel assured that you've really thought this through. And there are some countries that are closed for a variety of reasons. Ethiopia was closed by the DFE about 18 months ago.
It's the Hague Convention, isn't it? People sign up to the Hague Convention.
So there are countries across the world who are signed up to the Hague Convention, which builds in safeguards around process. So if families go to a Hague country to adopt, chances are we will recognise the process the child is being through, and this is going to be a child who isn't being trafficked or coerced into adoption. It's a child in need, where there will have been efforts made to rehabilitate, place with family, place domestically. So, and it also means that on the making of an adoption order in that country, the child becomes a British citizen. So bringing them into the country isn't complicated. But there are countries who aren't Hague ratified, who we do work with because we recognise their legal systems.
Right.
But there are countries where we don't recognise their legal systems or that are closed, and therefore part of our advice and work is to help people understand why that's the case. And no, you can't adopt from Ethiopia right now because there is no avenue to do that, and there's a good reason why. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting work because you get to learn so much about the world and different laws and regulations and practices and norms. So the team who run our advice line, I mean, they are experts in their field because they carry all of this knowledge around. So we have, fact sheets and databases and things where we record stuff, but really is about the nuances and understanding how you help people navigate this really complicated world, not only of adoption, but then of the international adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one thing that you've turned on its head for me is this thought about, because we hear so much about, and Al, you relate to this, white parents adopting mixed race or, BME or, I'm sorry, I may have offended people by saying mixed race, but we hear so much about that, but we don't hear about it the other way around. And that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. So, parents, the BME kind of community adopting white, because that's blown my mind, actually.
Yeah. I mean, there are hundreds of black families fostering white children.
Yeah.
And there's lots of those children who stay in those families permanently until they're of an age where they can be independent. Yeah. But there seems to be a barrier for that happening with an adoption order around it, which in my mind is just a much more permanent and secure arrangement.
But does it hint at kind of an inherent or kind of a subconscious racism? Because I've met one black man who had a white daughter. And I was literally, my mouth was wide open because I just thought, I hadn't realised it.
I think it's like a lot of things, yeah. I think it's like a lot of things when something looks visibly different, we do take a step back and think, what's that about? I mean, I'm a social work, minds tend to be a bit kind of on overdrive when it comes to being nosy anyway, but I'm always looking at people thinking, I wonder what that is. Is that an adopted child, or did that child come from overseas? And,
but we get that.
It's probably none of those things, but it's just, especially in England now, I mean, we are so diverse, particularly living in London, the city I live in. There is lots and lots of diversity, and people look and feel different, and it feels like there's some catching up to do, really. And I am of the view, otherwise I couldn't work for this organisation, that it's about who you are as a person. And if your child is different to you ethnically or through any other of these, long list of isms, then your job as a parent is to help that child understand their identity and make sense of it. And give them the tools and the mechanisms and the safety to explore it, understand it, make of it what they will. And I read that blog that was doing the rounds on Twitter a week or so ago about the international adoptee who wrote to her birth mother. And I didn't retweet it, even though I found it quite powerful, because I just felt it was really angry. And I'm sure there's good reason for that woman to be angry, but there's also all kinds of complexities happening in countries, particularly third world countries, where mothers do have babies and can't keep them. And we know, what the social political reasons might be, but it's not as simple as, I was given away and then sent abroad. And I struggle to understand, was it the loss of being adopted and not having your birth parent with you, or was it the fact that you had come from one country to another? Because actually the adoption experience and that, what I read between the lines, seemed to be pretty positive. She wasn't saying I had awful parents and hated being adopted. But it was, and I've spoken to many adopted adults who have had varied experiences of being adopted, but that's nothing to do with, not nothing, it's not just because it was an international adoption. It's because of all of the stuff that comes with childhood trauma and adversity. And loss and separation and identity and adoption, and is this my mum, is that my dad, isn't it, and of course the issue that international adoptees often also have on top of everything else is sometimes they can't search because there is no information.
But is it,
they are never going to find this mythical birth family.
I know I've got friends whose children there is no way they will ever find, because they were literally dropped off somewhere. But is the sense of loss that adoptees is a common theme? Is that not exacerbated by the then loss of culture, language, country, nationality, things that we understand loss, but then there's this extra layer that
it can be. It can be. I mean, I think this really came to a head for me around 2011 when I was at PACT. I was the director of adoption and fostering there, and we had a large inter-country adoption service there, which is now part of IAC, strangely enough. And we agreed to do a documentary with the BBC and Saira Khan and her husband Steve Hyde, who were adopting from Pakistan. And I guess because it was such an intense process being filmed during it, and Saira is a larger than life personality, but what really resonated with me was when I watched the completed films, it was life and death. If that baby hadn't been found when she was found, she would have died. There would have been no family, there would have been no country and identity in Pakistan. And she was really, really sick, and it was touch and go. But now I think she must be 8 or 9 now, and she's thriving, and she's not being raised in Pakistan. She is being raised in England, but she has a mum who is of Pakistani heritage. She has connections to her country of origin, and for me, surely that's better. And I think therefore our objective at IAC has become, how do we make it better? What needs to be in place to make it better? And there's all kinds of really interesting creative courses that we run, and Jan Wei, who has for a long time been our training and development manager, is an inter-country adopter. She has other connections to adoption as well, but she and her husband adopted a long time ago. Their child is now an adult. But she puts together these courses, I'm telling you, they really, really deliver, because they make the impact that you want learning and development to have on people. So today she just launched a blended families course, because we have lots of families who want to adopt from overseas where they already have birth children. So they want to extend their family, and this sometimes is because they want to make a difference to a vulnerable child on a global scale. So we've had our family, we've completed the children we wanted, now we want to go to South Africa and give another child a chance in life. And the blended families course came about because we were recognising that we have all kinds of prescriptions around adoption, but they don't always fit every family. So if your child is 2 or 3, the chances are a local authority or a voluntary adoption agency will say to you, go away for a few years till the child is older. We don't have to do that, because by the time the process has concluded, the child probably will be 5. And actually it allows the child to be prepared in a different way, because a 2-year-old can't manage a 3-year wait for a sibling. But the parents, by the time the child joins them, are much more immersed in adoption. They've made connections with other doctors. They've often visited the country. So, strangely enough, there's all kinds of advantages of doing it internationally, because the process post-approval is so different. And of course, it can be all incredibly stressful. When you have been approved as suitable, you just want to get on with it. You don't want a 3-year wait.
No, but I don't think that's any different to doing adoption in this country, is it?
No,
you just
exactly.
you want what you want. What? There's a delay because I'm just conscious that I can just see Al. His brain is just ticking over there. I wanted to talk about a little bit more about the kind of the status of a child who's adopted. I've been involved in a number of things through work specifically, where we get asked all the time, what are the rights of international adoptees with pupil premium and adoption support fund and all that sort of stuff. And there's so many kind of there's so many different kind of opinions and just, so this is a chance to say, what are adoptees from...
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, which isn't necessarily the political view, a child is a child.
Yeah.
If they have been adopted, we've talked a lot already about the children's backgrounds being very similar and the trauma and all of those issues. If they come to live in this country with their adoptive parents having followed a legal process, then surely they should have access to the same resources and support that any child has, whether they are adopted or not. And if there are specific services for adopted children, then of course we want our families and their children to have access to those in the same way. And I think that my view on it from a kind of resource point of view, because of course the resources are stretched, I know that, but the adoptive parents have already paid for the privilege of the process, so they've not accessed any public funds to enable them to adopt this child. By and large, because of the nature, often at least one of, if they're adopting as a couple, at least one of them will be paying taxes and will have been doing for a long time, particularly in the 3-year wait. So far as I'm concerned, they're banking up their taxes ready for their child's needs to be met. And I think it is as simple as that for me. And I think I get all of the challenges around waiting lists and postcode lotteries and et cetera, but the reality also still is that the adopters we work with at IAC will have to pay for that support to be in place if they want it, because they're not going to wait, 3 years for the local authority to do an assessment and then possibly be seen by CAMS. If their child needs support, they're going to find a way to do it because that's what they've already had to do.
Yeah.
So we have just, Jill retired at the end of March. We only, on Tuesday night, had her formal kind of farewell party. And so our 4 London and Brighton marathon runners this year will have raised close to £10,000. So I've pitched to the board and had approved the launching of a fund specifically to meet some of these needs, because I've worked in adoption for 24 years nearly, and over the time I've worked with inter-country adopters, I've seen them repeatedly be told no, no, no. And I want there to be a pot of money where we can say, look, you can access some of this fund and go off and get your clinical psychologist assessment because your child needs it now and can't wait for the politics to catch up.
It's complicated, isn't it? I think it
is.
It's. I was wanting to ask you a question, which you may not be able to answer, is that I think there's a lot of, well, maybe the press I'm reading, but there's a lot of bad press about international adoption. I think that's not necessarily UK international adoption, but US, which it's a much bigger phenomena and strongly linked to Christian evangelicalism, and it's just a capitalist model on one level. It's and there's. How do you counter that? Because I read Catherine Joyce's book Child Catchers, which I don't know whether you've read, but it's just genuinely horrifying. This idea of adoption agencies basically going around the world and jumping to the next country. Ethiopia shuts, they go to the next poorest country, and then and they basically giving nice white people nice black babies.
We know that's happened. I don't know to what scale it's happened. I think, like a lot of things, there's a lot of media hype and sensationalism.
Yeah.
But I don't want to downplay it either, because the reality is I don't know the facts. I've certainly worked with prospective adopters. I remember a case in Mexico when I was at PACT, and they had been matched with twins who were babies, and before that case could even proceed to a matching meeting, the lawyer who was overseeing this adoption had been arrested, and any child he was linked to couldn't be placed for adoption. Wow. So it happens. We know it happens, and that's why regulations like the Hague Convention are so important. What I can say from my IAC's experience is that we try to work with agencies who can demonstrate that they have a similar ethical and moral value base to ours. Some of those we know through our networks. The US is a bit of a minefield because there's thousands of adoption agencies. The regulations vary by state. In some states, you only need to be some sort of family lawyer, and you can be validating people as suitable to adopt.
Right.
So we tend to partner with agencies, and of course we don't always have a say because the adopters are the ones that have to choose these agencies sometimes. But we try to provide the guidance. So if we know there's an organisation that's had a dodgy past, then we don't advise people work with them, or we don't let them work with them. And but it's a minefield, and I think the sad reality is we know there are millions of children being exploited every day for all kinds of reasons. Adoption is just one small part of that. And I'm really keen to try to understand it a bit better and dispel those myths further, because as far as I'm concerned, the adoptions that are happening through central authorities like the DFE are very, very unlikely to have these sorts of scenarios anywhere along that chain of the child coming from a family, being placed for adoption for whatever reason, and then joining an adoptive family. And I was at a European adoption meeting at the beginning of April, ironically my second day on the job formally, and it was fascinating because there was 13 countries around the table, and I didn't sense from one of those countries that they would stand for anything that looked, smelt vaguely dodgy. Particularly when it comes to child trafficking and money exchanging hands for the wrong reasons. So I think there's enough good within the system to counteract the bad, but sadly, the good never gets the press. It's always going to be the one or two small cases that then become the next Liam Neeson movie.
And I guess the reality
is not the best example given.
No, the looking at the numbers of children that are coming through to the UK, and also I think that really clear sort of model that you've shown of families who are kind of going maybe to their country of origin and saying, actually, we want to bring a child from, I'm from Pakistan or I'm from India or wherever. That feels like there's a value in that, and there's ethics in that. I still feel, if I'm honest, I feel quite uncomfortable with nice white people going and getting nice black babies. I mean, that's maybe my problem, and maybe I'm overthinking it. But and Scott knows.
I think there's lots of reasons why that makes us feel a particular way, and I think it's all of the legacy of all kinds of history that's gone, centuries before us. And it's the legacy of that. But I mean, I still take it back to, when you are somebody, and you've both done it, so you'll know better than I do. When you are somebody who wants to parent a child that isn't yours by birth, there's not usually just one single reason that drives that. There's a multitude of different reasons. If you're doing it as a couple, then your partner will have different reasons. Perhaps some might be the same, some might be different. So if you're driven to do that, it's not always, literally it's not going to be a black and white issue. So, and it doesn't change it, but I think we have to understand beyond the surface here, because the white adopters I've worked with whose children have a different skin tone to them because of their ethnicity don't think or feel about their children any differently to any other adopter or any other birth parent, usually for that matter. Because it's about the relationship. So I think for me, that's why I always take it back to, I'm here to make the world a better place for children. That's my role in it. I don't have a birth child. I don't plan to have any sort of child, but this is my contribution to children and their welfare and their future generations. And I feel really strongly that, as a social worker, as the CEO of this organisation, it's my place in the world to create as much cohesion between adopters and vulnerable children who genuinely need adoption, and however that comes about, it's my job to find a creative way to make it the best it can be. And I think people respond to that because it's a human to human level, not skin to colour to race to religion, if you start breaking it down, then there are people who have very strong views and won't adopt children of a different ethnicity or even of a different religion. Personally, I don't get it because I don't think like that. And I think it's, for me, it's just about children.
That's an interesting point because obviously Al's got his, 3 of his children are certainly not, I always worry about when I'm saying this.
I'm loving you squirming.
White.
Go on, say it, Scott.
They're not white,
say it, Scott.
They're not white.
Say it, Scott.
They're not white. I've just said it. But interesting.
Just say it.
When shut up. 13 years ago, when we had been approved and we were looking for a match, we were introduced to 2 children who weren't white. They were, I think they were, I can't even remember now. I can remember their names and I can remember their photographs, but I can't remember their ethnicity. And actual fact, the reason we thought long and hard about it actually, because they were perfect in every way. They were perfect. The one thing, and you can feel free to challenge me on this, the one thing that we couldn't do to them, it wasn't about us, because we knew having 2 dads anyway would make them different. But we lived in a community that was just purely white. So, I honestly can't remember the specifics of their background. And
I think those are real issues.
For us, it was about how could we, open them up to that? Because for us, it wasn't an issue because we're different anyway. So I guess I'm challenging a little bit, but I'm also looking for you to kind of challenge back.
Well, I think, if my husband and I wanted to adopt, I think we would. He was really interested. We've, never wanted children as a couple, but he once said to me that if we ever did adopt a child, it would have to be a child with additional needs.
Right.
That was his motivation to want to give something. I don't think I would necessarily make that choice proactively.
Yeah.
But the child's ethnicity genuinely wouldn't matter to me. Now, I'm in a different position. I live in central London. I go out my front door, I hear 50 different languages and see 50 different skin tones.
Yeah.
So, and of course, we don't want to replicate the experience children had from the 1960s and 70s where they were the only black child.
Yeah.
What that means. And whilst the world has moved on in lots of ways, there are still daily examples of children being bullied for all kinds of reasons, including the colour of their skin.
Yeah.
And so I agree. I think there's a balance to be struck between not putting children in a situation that's going to create additional problems. But I remember when PACT were opening our Brighton office, which was specifically, it was branded at the time as an LGBT adoption service.
Yeah.
And the stats at that point was showing that within the gay community, 27% of people adopting were in mixed heritage relationships, which was about double the national average. So I think there already are different, when you start to break it down, there are different ways to cut the cake. And the struggle I have is throughout my career, I've seen children wait much longer than they needed to because of these issues. I'm not for 1 minute advocating that, we start placing children randomly with whoever's first on the conveyor belt.
Yeah.
But I've seen too much resistance, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the transracial door not swinging both ways. There's all kinds of barriers in place to prevent children being placed sooner. Sometimes they're in our experience on a day-to-day, sometimes they're in, the lives of our extended family, sometimes it's just about politics or the community we live in. And so perhaps, Scott, if you and your husband at the time had thought, well, we do want these children, we will just move to central London to raise them. Now, whether that's realistic or not, there are different ways to manage things and making them happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of conversations I've often had with the doctors over the years when I've been the social worker, either placing children or family finding for them. How do we make this happen? How do we make it real? If you think you can parent this child, and I don't think there's enough creativity in social work, particularly in adoption. I'm sure, my colleagues listening will challenge that, but I think you have to be creative. Now, when I was a junior social worker, I learned very quickly how to give the best service to my prospective adopters. They didn't wait for children, they got matched pretty quickly, and if they did wait, the child they ended up with was a really, really good fit for their family. And I always did that by thinking outside the box. If I'd done the cookie cutter model of these are the matching needs, these are what the children, will bring to the family, and it was a different time. It was easier to do this sort of practice then because actually there wasn't so many boxes that I had to be ticking. Mm-hmm. But it was about being creative and about, again, taking it back to a human level. Mm-hmm. This is a child who has a need. The need is for a family. Yes, they have this other list of needs as a result of their experiences from pre-birth to date. They're going to be losing their foster carers who they've lived with for 12 months. But if you are motivated to adopt, then you come into it knowing it's going to be different to having a pregnancy and giving birth. Mm. So it's the job of the adoption service then to put in place what you need to make it happen. It doesn't always work like that. Yeah. But we know from the research that Julie Selwyn did a few years ago, despite all of the problems, the breakdown rate in England was remarkably lower than the anecdotes would have had us believe.
Yes.
And I think the reason for that was because when you become a family through adoption, because it is legal, you make it work somehow. Yeah. You fight through the difficulties. Yes, things go wrong, children have to leave. I've been involved in enough of those cases to know why, but you make it work. And I've always kind of, in my mind, thought it a bit akin to marriage and living with someone. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with either option, but when you are married to somebody, if you want to walk away, you have to go through a process to create that separation. Mm. And sometimes by going through those steps, you realise actually you don't really want to go. You don't want to leave.
Yeah.
So you make it work. Whereas actually, if you're just living together, you can pack your case. If there's no, really one of you on the lease or the mortgage, you pack your bags and go.
Yeah.
And I know I'm simplifying it a little bit, but that's honestly what I've seen over the years. And I mean, the difficulties adopters have had, inter-country adoption are no different.
You raised an interesting point there, the difference between the anecdotal evidence of adoption breakdown versus the actual stats, which I think that's across all adoption. I think that's really interesting that people talk about it as though they're falling like dominoes, but it's not. And
that includes these children who are placed transracially, transculturally, internationally. So I think there's ways to make it work, and I think, with everything that's going on in the world right now, if a child can find a permanent home with a family who's genuinely going to love and care and protect them, then I'm all for it. Mm.
I didn't ask my difficult questions, and I'm not going to. I'm
glad about that, because actually I want to keep it on a positive, because we dipped in and we dipped out positive next. And I think that the interesting thing is that what I want to do, if it's all right with both of you actually, is to come back to this at some point. Once you've done maybe 12 months, 18 months, because I think that I just think it's such an interesting topic. I really do, because like I said, I know people from years ago, actually. I remember in my childhood, someone my dad worked with, they'd adopted from China. And it's still there, it's still relevant. So for me, it's just, something that happens. But actually, I'd be really interested to look at kind of more, you mentioned the Brighton Marathon guys and how you want to kind of really make sure that money is spent in a way that's going to be of use for that. So I'd be really interested to come back to this in 12, 18 months and
No, it'd be good for me too, because actually I've got some, I've always been very opinionated about these matters, but whether that kind of, is born in reality with what I'm able to achieve over the next 18 months will be very interesting. And the world is changing around us. RAAs are emerging.
Are they? We hadn't noticed.
Apparently.
Well, only in a literal sense.
I don't know. I genuinely don't know what impact that might have on people coming to IAC. Well, maybe there will genuinely be more motivation for them to adopt domestically. I don't know.
Well, if you could increase the number of people of colour who adopt internationally, then I would be happy. I'm not going to mention the person I know who bought a baby from Romania. I'm not going to mention the orphanage I visited in Kenya. I'm not going to mention the money and how it maybe used the better ways. But I think you have really made me think differently. So I think I really appreciate you doing that. And I think there's a lot of ignorance probably.
Yeah, there is. And I think it's always going to be a complicated matter, and I think that it is about just reinforcing the positives. And as I said earlier, IAC is here to make sure that the standards are the same. This is about children. Adoption has always been about giving children a safe family with the safeguards that we built into that process. And it's no different if you want to go overseas. And if children can then come and join their families and thrive, as I said earlier, that's what IAC exists for. And we want to honour our lifelong commitment to those children the same way that other adoption agencies do in this country. And we are placing children domestically, so it is a mixed bag for us. And we want our offer to be equal across the piece.
Fab.
Fair enough.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I feel like I've been on I don't know what I've been on. Have I done an HND in something? What is it? What they call BTEC, isn't it? It feels like I've done a BTEC in international or in the country adoption tonight because I've learned so much.
Fabulous. Happy to help as always.
Always.
Well, listen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been great.
You've really, because it's late, and you've been on your decaf tea. So, but let's come back to this in 18 months or so.
Yes.
See where you're at. See where IAC is at, because I think that it's really like if you don't follow them on Twitter already, listeners, then please do have a look for the Intercountry Adoption Centre because it's since you joined, really, I think that started to use social media a little bit.
I was fortunate enough to have a trip to South Africa to check out our partner charity there, and we set it up before we left just so that there was something to kind of share, really.
Yeah, well, I think it's still relevant, isn't it? Because all the issues are all the same and what have you. So make sure you follow that. So, but Satwinder, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
So there you go. And now reflecting back 2 weeks later,
was it?
3 weeks? I don't know. It was weeks ago now.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Weeks and weeks ago now. And I found it to be really interesting, but I am conscious that I was sat quietly in the corner.
Unusually, actually, it was. I wasn't Paxman. I was a nice interviewer.
You were very nice. Yes.
Yeah, I was. I guess it was probably because of my interest in it more than. You had a lot of questions. It wasn't that you weren't interested, it was just that you had a lot of questions. And
concerns?
Most of our questions came after we stopped recording.
Yeah.
It was a long interview. We could have talked, actually,
Satwinder
could have talked for a couple of
hours.
We
did another half hour afterwards, didn't we?
Exactly.
Just chatting.
Yeah. And I think that's proof of really the complexities of some of this stuff that happens with IAC. But what I was interested in, and I didn't know this, was that the CEO who he's replaced was the founder of IAC, and that's a lot of years to be a CEO.
To keep that machine rolling.
I know, because that could have just petered out, and someone else could have taken it on and kind of, I don't know, another agency could have just picked up stuff.
Yeah, it could have quite easily been just absorbed by one of the RAs.
Exactly, and nothing happened with it. But it was really interesting to hear that they're kind of commissioned to do the overseas bits for local authorities and stuff like that. Because I kind of guessed how it worked, because I knew that you had to still be assessed in the UK to adopt from abroad. But it's a lot more complex than actually I thought. Well, not complex, but there's a
few more hoops.
And there is quite a few more hoops.
I think what impressed me was that I think I was really nervous about asking the questions I wanted to ask, and I kind of did, so I didn't want to just kind of bool in and give him these ugly questions. But I think him himself was he felt like a really safe
pair of hands.
Yeah.
And obviously he's not an adopter, which he...
I don't know why. I don't know.
You totally made that up.
Yeah.
Fabrication.
In my head he was.
Fantasy Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I live in a world full of fantasy.
Yes, fairies and leprechauns now. Scott's moved to Ireland. But what I found was that my questions, I didn't feel I needed to ask them, because I thought he's not just a figurehead. Yeah. He's someone who's made a very conscious decision to come and work there, understanding the nuances. Yeah. So that in that sense, do I trust him as a person? Well, I got to know him a little bit and thought, actually, I trust you that you are addressing these issues.
Yes.
And also I thought, he's like literally weeks into the job. I'm not sure that now's the time to go, but what about? Go Barrow.
Yeah.
Go all Martin Barrow on his ass. Did you see Martin Barrow tweeted me and said, I hope you're going to give him a good grilling.
Nice to some of you guys.
Yeah. Sorry, Martin. He's watching us.
Yeah, he is.
And so that reassured me, and also that nuance that I hadn't understood, that actually I'd kind of got this image of nice white Christians, evangelicals, like scooping babies out of countries, and that's clearly not the case, and it reflected perhaps a really different narrative around, first generation, whatever nation, going back to their country of origin and bringing children back, which is still complicated, but different to that stereotype.
And I guess that there's so many, people who are in the public eye who, talk about wanting to adopt, and you're
dancing around that though.
I am a little bit.
It's a next page 3 model who's exactly. I'm going to adopt a baby from Africa.
Yeah, I think it was Thailand, she said, wasn't it? Anyway, but that aside, it'd be very easy just to believe those stories. And as we know, the American system, so people like Angelina Jolie, who adopted, and Madonna adopted, didn't she?
Yep.
From Africa,
Malawi?
I think it was, Malawi. That system's different, but it's probably very similar in terms of how they would be able to adopt out there. So,
which he did comment on afterwards, because we did kind of ask, turn the recorder off and then ask him some really blunt questions, and he was quite really frank and upfront about them. But I think I was conscious that when we pressed record, he was talking as very much as the head of an organisation, and at very early stages, and so I think it would be good to go back to him in a year and kind of go, right, okay, let's look at some of this stuff.
Yeah. And he was a really engaging guest as well, actually.
He was lush. He was an absolute star.
Hopefully he's forgiven me for assuming he was an adoptive parent.
I think he got over it. I think he did get over it. But I think he gave a good account of international adoption. I think there's still, to be honest, it's not unique to international. All adoptions still got those question marks about origins, identity, but they're maybe more magnified. Well, it's significantly magnified. I've got friends who've adopted children from different nationalities, and it's complicated.
It is very complicated.
If Life Story were complicated for us, and then some for them.
But that is the world we live in.
Well, it's funny because I was having a conversation with a friend who's she's half Ghanaian, husband's I think he's Nigerian, and I'd said to her, I'm going to have this conversation. And she's someone I sound things off. She's a social work friend, and I sound things off with her. And I was saying, I'm really uncertain. And she went, And she'd gone home and talked to her husband, and her husband, was a country where children are taken from, and he went, his perspective was, you're giving children a chance they would never have in a culture where, if you're on the bottom rung of the ladder in some countries, is nothing like the bottom rung of the ladder. Yeah, it's life or death. And that changes the dynamic again. But you see online the conversations from international adoptees, especially from the US, it's such an emotive issue for a lot of people who feel genuinely, and rightly so, that not only that trauma of being removed, but that you took me from another country. You've dislocated me not only from my biology but from my everything. You dropped me in
sometimes language as well.
Yeah, and I didn't even mention that. I mean, I've read a book. There's a book, and I've read articles where people have been children have been taken from Ethiopia speaking and whatever the native tongue is. By the time they've learned English in a US system, and then said, "Oh, you do know I've got a mum and dad." First things out of their mouth, and people go, "What the?" whoa, we were told, we were told at point of sale, literally, these children had no. Well, I know, you're pulling your face.
No,
point of sale.
Sometimes.
That these children had no parents, and they're going, no, my mum and dad just thought we were going for an education in the US, and we'll be back in 10 years, and you go, no.
And that's why there's a lot of kind of,
But having said that, I kind of felt he was safe hands, because he's worked in, was it Tact he's worked for? Pact. And he's worked in that service and got a really good track record, and I felt like, and also as a person of colour, he's someone he can talk about stuff in a way that those two white men cannot.
Yeah, exactly.
I also feel my career's on the line every time I talk about colour. Maybe it is, I don't know. So it was a good interview.
Yeah, and definitely one to have back. I know we keep saying that, but we will be revisiting
a whole long list of people.
I know, yeah.
I really want to get on a Rhodes back. The relationships from Tavistock.
Oh yeah.
So desperate to get her back, and I think we need to go and see her. That's the only you and me need to go to her office.
I meant for our relationship, not for
No, it's going to get complicated. No, I just think she was I've never had so much fun in an interview. It was literally like Mary Poppins. So we should do that.
We should go.
Katie Wrench.
Yeah. Now Katie Wrench is always a giggle as well.
Yeah.
What she does is very good.
And also the autistic doctors.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Helen
or the doctors of autism.
Helen and
Katie.
That's it.
Yeah.
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 Sure.
You positive? I think we've drawn ourselves onto thin ice, haven't we?
I can't.
Oh, so many people.
There's so many people as well. Yeah. Because I have a new one that I want to get on as well. So,
I want to get my people to talk to your people. And one little thing we're trying to move delicately into getting adoptees to speak more.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of them coming up.
We have.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
We've got Barry and we've got Courtney.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
And I think when you say we're being
tentative
about it, we are very much being tentative about it, because I think there's no risk about it. I mean, these stories are very much what we need to hear.
I'm not frightened of what people are going to say.
No, exactly, no. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's in a similar way to foster care and adoptive stories, unless they say something, that's kind of
outrageous or safeguarding,
or that they want to have removed, and it's their story. And it's just
Our only caution is that we don't want to curate adoptees' voices, because we're not adoptees. I feel totally. I have permission to say to an adopter, ask them really difficult questions, but I'm conscious that we don't want to. And I said this to Courtney before we talked. I said, what I don't want to do is to kind of say, we've got this adoption and foster home podcast. We're adopters, and we want to give you permission to speak on our thing, because that feels really
it is wrong.
Patronising.
Yeah, exactly. And we aren't like that.
And that was our nervousness, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that it'll be interesting to hear a range of stories. So, I know Barry's adopted quite some time ago. Yeah. Courtney more recently, but still quite a while 80s. Ago. And it's really difficult to grab that kind of the 21, 22, 23-year-old voice, but we will be able to grab.
You've got a few inroads to people who are willing to talk. I think I listened to. I mean, Barry. People won't have heard Barry's yet, but what I liked about Barry's is that it's a story. It's a story of absolute hope, and the system's different and the culture's different, but the trauma is the trauma of our children. His trauma is the trauma that my children have, and him as a older guy, it's quite easy, and he can say, "I see it now clearly. I see it." And he talked about some of his earliest memories, and I spent an afternoon with him, and it was just amazing. Yeah. And we've prattled on, haven't we?
You have.
Shall we now say, if you want to leave the podcast now?
Yeah.
Please leave.
Please hit the X button on your device.
Yeah, and if you're running, we've got a lot of people running lately.
I saw that. I think I saw that on Friday or Thursday.
Yes.
Or whenever it was. And someone actually said these are brilliant for having to walk on.
It's that monotonous.
Yeah. Tone,
I feel my voice is deeper today because of the rock and roll weekend we've got. Like adoption's answer to Barry White.
I've been hacking up furballs all night.
Nice.
Yeah. So yes.
Yeah. So shall we talk wedding?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Shall we do it?
Yeah. Interview me. Don't go past me.
Okay. So how was your wedding?
Well,
but how was it? But how was it?
It was the most amazing few days.
You bubbled like a child constantly.
A lot. And to be fair, I think most people did, apart from you, because you're too hard to
No,
did you have a little...
A moment. A little moment.
It was unusual because the two things that I was dreading, one was making my vows, as in my personal vows, and the other one was doing my speech.
Yeah, presume you weren't dreading because you had to make vows.
Yeah, no, just because I had to
get through that.
And this is a bizarre thing, and in actual fact, because Jenny Knock was there, wasn't she? And she was at the first conference that I did for Adoption UK when I chaired it, and I got into my flow, and it was all really cool. And I was chatting to her about it yesterday, and I was saying to her, when it's not personal, you can get over those nerves quite quickly.
Yeah.
When it's personal, and you're talking about really personal things, and you're sharing a story with friends and family as well.
Really intimate stuff.
Yeah, actually, it's powerful stuff.
And Paul and I talked about this because Paul is here. And what made it really different was because weddings normally a start moment in people's...
not an end.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying this is an end. Having spent a bit of time with you two, that's not impossible.
No. No, you're right, because we've done things because, it's just the way life's worked for the gays.
So the ceremony caught this. It was a wedding which marked a personal journey and also a journey for society. Because when you first got together, you couldn't do this.
No, exactly. Yeah.
So you go, that is a milestone. It's not just a personal milestone. It's for me, and for me, it reflected a milestone in my thinking. I've been totally honest about where I came from, 80s northern lad, or it's just outside of what I knew, and not necessarily particularly proud of all of that. But then also having your children there, and then feeding into that, it became this really like just a moment, like a block in your life where you celebrate all that's gone, but you look forwards to all that is ahead.
Exactly.
And so Paul was, we had to literally put her on a drip. She was in tatters, the poor woman. And I was really, really emotive because I thought this comes at a cost. Whereas normally a wedding you go, oh bless them, they've come together.
Kids, or they might not.
The start of a journey, and there's that optimism. But this was like there's an optimism in the future, but there was a sense of flipping heck. What cost that this has come, and I know the journey with your boys, and like a lot of adopters. We danced around that a bit in the ceremony because you don't want to kind of go on.
No. There've been little,
you don't, this is not the time or place to reflect on some of those challenges, but they were noted, and you think, wow, and it made me think that something that I understand now why people kind of have those they redo
their vows and stuff.
Redo their vows. I thought, oh,
yeah. I mean, there was a couple of standout bits for me, and one was we picked roles for the boys that fitted with them. So, as an example, Brandon, very quiet.
Yeah,
he would never speak in public.
It's not comfortable.
The celebrant, what have you called him? What was he called? What did he call himself?
The
celebrant.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, John. He does a candle ceremony in his thing, and so Brandon brought one of our unity candle to the front table. We maybe should have told Brandon that he was doing because we forgot to.
Note to self.
Well, he knew he was doing something, but
you'd admitted to tell him.
The little boy who was supposed to be doing one of the candles couldn't come, so we had to kind of shuffle it around a little bit, and we'd forgotten to tell Brandon that he was doing that. Anyway, he was fine with that. Jacob did a reading that he
very
wrote, well. He adapted from.
Yep.
It was some programming, but that was quite powerful. And then probably the most powerful thing was when Fraser did his speech when he welcomed everybody. Oh, that was.
You having a flashback?
Yeah, I am actually. Thankfully, they're all recorded, so I can watch them again by mother-in-law, who used up probably the memory of the whole cloud.
Yeah, the islands.
Yeah, exactly.
Allowance.
But the reason it hit me with Fraser was because we didn't realise on Thursday night we had a meet and greet, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we all had a little drink, and Fraser was tipsy, shall we say, by about 6 p.m. because of the stress that
just a huge level of anxiety.
He just had a lot of anxiety about making a speech and because he hadn't written it because Fraser's always last minute. So anyway, there was a few people there that helped him and did that with him. But it was the words that he used. They didn't write it for him. He told them what he wanted to say, and they wrote it down word for word. And just it was almost like an acknowledgement that yes, we've been little assholes over the years, but actually I love you.
It wasn't a sugar. It wasn't like a saccharine. Everything's fine.
That's the thing, because yes, exactly that. I'm always conscious of people whose children don't live with them because they've whatever's happened has happened, whether it's to do with the trauma or whether they just don't go on and stuff like that. And I'm very lucky to still be in a position where yes, Fraser doesn't live with us, kind of, because he kind of lives with me a little bit. But equally, the older two are independent through their own choice, and that was
making their lives.
Yeah, exactly. But probably the other highlights was actually you in a kilt.
I have to say, I love kilts. The freedom.
It's the first time I've ever worn one as well. Everybody looked amazing. Like, I was worried it was going to look dominant male, because it's
a lot of men, isn't it? A lot of men.
Bridesmaids or flower girls or anything like that. We just had 2 best men and then the 4 boys who, and yes, there was 4 boys, not 3 boys, because obviously Eloy, who started the path for us to become parents, being a Spanish student years ago. But yeah, it was just...
It was fantastic.
It didn't look like that at all. And
no. Apart from Canadian Mike, who was lovely, and he brought his friend Andrew. But when Andrew started to put me in chokeholds a lot, which got slightly...
Deserved.
I know, but he did literally start to get me in chokeholds because he said I looked like Begbie out of Train Spotting, and he kept coming up to me and swearing in the most profound way, doing a Begbie impression, and then getting me in a chokehold, which I found mildly oppressive, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah.
He's got a wrong idea of me.
Yeah.
But I love the kilt. The kilts were great.
Yeah, the kilts were great.
Yeah, in fact.
There was a huge number of highlights, and you know what it's like after you've done it. Things pop into your head about what happened during the day. You can't unsee Al Coates in his boxer shorts.
Trunks, thank you.
His trunks with me kneeling in front of him putting his kilt on. That's all I'm going to say. So visualise that.
Yeah.
And then forget about it. At least you didn't see it.
Scott, I can't get this to work.
I know. And then even, just the whole thing, the meal was fantastic.
Yeah.
Everybody really appreciated us kind of doing it our way.
It was great.
A speech between each meal. And anybody who was taking Al seriously, including myself, he was prepared for his speech. And it was hilarious. And your See You Jimmy hat went down a treat.
It was touching. I hadn't worked out my words. I just had my props.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
It was great. And Andy's as well. His speech was really good.
His was like a proper speech, wasn't it? He really prepared and put the effort in.
Especially one of the jokes. I'm not
no, don't go there. Don't go there.
Yeah, it was very funny.
But anyway,
yeah. And then I don't think, personally, and then this topped it off for me, we didn't organise the band in the disco. The band were meh.
I liked the band.
They were all right.
I liked the band.
But the disco man...
I danced all night.
I have never gone to anywhere where I have actually not gotten off the dance floor.
But do you know what that is?
Go on.
It's so much fun dancing in a skirt.
Maybe.
It gives you so much extra moves. And that's a real thing. You've got the hustly one, you've got the sassy one, you've got the salsa move, and you've got the twirl. Yeah. I tell you, I'm never going to a disco without a dress on again. I am converted. I loved it.
And you've just made me
cough up.
Remember that. Yes, my kilt was lifted up quite a lot.
Well, that's why I wear pants. People said, my mum said, that's shameful. You should wear. And I went, oh yeah, at a wedding. We all know how that ends. 2:00 in the morning, everyone's had a bit of what's up here?
Yeah, I was upskirted.
That's terrible.
I know. I was
violated. Yeah, you like hell you were.
To be fair, it wouldn't have been. Yeah. Anyway,
so it was.
There was a lot of Scott showing his backside.
Bottom.
Yes, and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, bottom.
And there's lots of evidence of it, which is more worrying.
Yeah, it was a bit,
silly boy.
Not big, not clever,
no, exactly.
Doesn't impress anyone.
But it was my wedding, so I was allowed to do what I wanted to do.
And you truly did that.
And just to acknowledge, my now husband looked very handsome in his.
And the flash mob was fantastic.
And his flash mob as well.
Yeah, which I was part of. You weren't Paula, wasn't it? We all.
You kept a secret.
I kept a secret from you. It was very good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, exactly.
There was not one bit of it that wasn't fantastic.
No. And then yesterday we had everybody around to the house.
Yes.
And we had a chilled afternoon.
Yes.
With some food and some cups of tea, water, wine, whatever anybody wanted, before people started flying back to the UK.
Yeah, and now you're just waiting for me to leave your house.
Yeah, hopefully it's going to be
the longest 3 hours of your life.
But the whole thing from start to finish was just amazing. It was really good. Just loved it. Loved every second of it.
Well done. It was a fantastic one. And a real honour and privilege to be here.
Yes, and thank you to you for agreeing to be the best man to somebody who you've known for a few years.
Well, that was all reflected on.
The first time you've been in my house, which is just like weird, isn't it? We acknowledged that before you got here. I was like, you do realise you've never been to my house?
Yeah, you should never. Yeah.
And what
internet friends?
My house stays at my house. Thank you.
Yeah, you are like the Hugh Hefner of Ireland, just permanently pyjamas, and silk.
Yeah,
you know,
my silks. Yes,
the smoking jacket.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Anyway, that was that weekend.
Excellent. Well, I think that's probably enough teasers.
I think it is,
and then let's make it quite a long podcast because Satwinder's talked for a long time. Didn't he?
Yes.
But thank you for having me, and that was that. It was good.
Bye, listeners.
Bye. That's all right, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.